Hello and welcome. You are watching Jumpstart India, our new e-Conclave series. Over the past several weeks, India Today has brought you insights from top global public health experts on the fight against the coronavirus. Now, after a month of being in lockdown, we need to start fighting the economic virus on a war footing. How do we revive the Indian economy from corona coma without jeopardizing the battle against the virus? How should we save both lives and livelihoods? I have a very distinguished panel of top corporate voices joining me on the inaugural edition of Jumpstart India. My first guest is Puneet Chatwal. He's the Managing Director and Chief Executive Officer of South Asia's largest hospitality brand, the Indian Hotel Company Limited, which runs the Taj and Vivanta Group of hotels. He's also the President of the Hotel Association of India. Kulhin Lalbhai is the Executive Director of Arvind Limited. He drives new initiatives in the consumer business of the group. The Arvind Group runs brands like Arrow, Flying Machine, Nautica and Megamart. Chandrajit Banerjee is the Director General of the Confederation of Indian Industry. He knows more about what's happening across India Inc. than anyone else. Arjun Sharma is the Chairperson of the Select Group. He runs the popular Select City Malls, has interests across shopping centres, travel and tourism, hospitality, retail, agriculture and private equity. For a perspective on the company's startup sector, we've invited Varun Khaitan. He's the founder and director of UrbanClap Technologies India Private Limited. UrbanClap is a home services company. So welcome to all our guests. I want to start by asking Puneet Chatwal about the hospitality sector, because this is one sector that's been deeply disrupted by the coronavirus. Bookings down to almost zero. How bad are things at this moment, Mr. Chatwal? And post the 3rd of May, when lockdown 2.0 gets over, what do you think can be the roadmap to try to ventilate the hospitality sector?
Thank you. I think, as you rightly said, is one of the worst impacted sectors beside the aviation is the hotel industry. And with air traffic being shut down, with trains being shut down, with highways not working, with a complete lockdown, there is no way for guests to come in and go out. Over and above that, there is obviously the fear in the minds of consumers going forward in what to expect when they get into such establishments. Having said that, I do believe that we will have two phases going forward. One is the post-lockdown or the post-corona phase, and the second is what we call the post-vaccine phase. I think the post-vaccine phase will bring us to the new normal very, very rapidly. And there will be less fear, there will be less anxiety. And I think a lot of the business will come back to what we call the new normal, while everything will not be the same.
What do you think the new normal will look like? Because a lot of the hospitality bookings come from the MICE vertical, which is meetings, incentives, conferences, exhibitions. A lot of people, as they've stayed home this month, may have come to the conclusion we actually don't need to travel. We don't even know if it's safe to travel. There's definitely no need to go to a big gathering in a hotel. Do you think all of that could impact the speed at which the hospitality sector is able to bounce back, Mr. Chatwal?
Absolutely. In the next 6 to 12 months, for sure, that will have a major impact on how we bounce back. But interestingly, I heard a presentation of BCG today, Boston Consulting Group, and they came up with a very nice, analogy, which I would like to share, which is called the ABC of consumers, in which they say the attitude is what they believe. Today, what they believe is everything is, a question mark. It's a high risk. The second is behavior, which is what they do. And what they do is try to feel as secure as possible, and going forward, try to experiment new things and see for the consumption in what they buy. And that buying behavior will see a certain change, but is not like nothing changed in the last 10, 15 years, as if the change is only going to come in the next 10 to 15 months. I do believe that we will have the MICE. I do believe we'll have the wedding sector come back. I do believe we will continue to celebrate our festivals like we have done in the past, and with maybe certain measures and social distancing norms, which will become maybe the new normal going forward.
Kulin Lalbhai, the concern from the retail sector's perspective is that there's a lot of worries about job security, and people may or may not want to go to big brands, want to spend extra on buying clothes. Do you believe that all discretionary spending, at least in the short term, could be impacted? What kind of a road to recovery are you hoping for, Mr. Lalbhai?
Yes, I think if you split retail into essential and non-essential, I think essential retail has been on throughout the crisis, the food, grocery, but the non-essential retail, as you rightly put it, these are discretionary spends. And as soon as the graded lockdown also opens up, people would not be swarming back to the stores to buy a product. If you look at the only case study we have in the world, which is China, 2 months after their lockdown, they're still looking at a business which is 30 to 40% less than pre-COVID levels. So I think one very clear thing is that this is not going to be a very quick bounce back. I think definitely it will take 4 to 6 months to come back to a certain level of business. And even that business would not be right up to pre-COVID levels, because it will take time for disposable income to come back. I think what is going to be very critical, like the way we are currently thinking about safe manufacturing, safe consumption, and safe shopping, will need to be something that the industry and the government will have to work very strongly on. Because only when consumers feel things are safe will they come back to stores and purchase. And I think every type of retail can be made safe. Obviously, e-commerce is a very safe channel. Standalone stores on high streets, which have fewer footfalls, can be made very safe. And even though it's kind of misunderstood, a mall can be incredibly safe because it has one entry and one exit. I think the industry will have to work very hard to become very safe in its practices and then convince the customers that safe shopping is possible.
What's your plan to reopen manufacturing? One of the key concerns is to see how factories can be brought up and running once again. The government has said you have to arrange for your own transportation, see if you can find ways of ensuring that the employees stay very close to the manufacturing premises. Are you planning to reopen factories, or would you rather for demand to start picking up and then start manufacturing? There's a bit of a catch-22 situation at this moment.
Yes, till demand comes in, especially domestic demand, it will be challenging for manufacturing to really scale up because the cash flow would come from the end consumer points. However, there are some export orders that certain segments of manufacturing have. And, we have worked very hard on safe manufacturing as well. And that would entail opening factories with less than 50% workforce, dividing the workforce into Group A, Group B, and preventing any overlap. The transport that you managed, regular fumigation of all the premise, masks. There's a lot of hard work that has gone in. And I think government and industry have worked hard to put together an SOP. And we will have to challenge ourselves to kind of scale up. And hopefully, as the domestic demand comes in and scales up post-May, it will become more viable for manufacturing to really scale up.
Mr. Venu Srinivasan runs the TVS group of companies, one of India's most well-regarded industrialists. Mr. Srinivasan, the auto sector in particular has been terribly hit by this lockdown, because the entire sector, report recently said, has sold virtually close to zero two-wheelers or three-wheelers. What kind of a road to recovery are you looking at post the 3rd of May?
The road to recovery has to be led by demand. And for demand, we are looking at a 5 or 6 or 7% economic expansion, fiscal expansion that the government should do, which we are talking about $100 to $120 billion in addition to what they've done. They've done very well on the monetary space, and we are very happy with that. What they've done for NBFCs, for banks, repo rates, for forcing people to lend, all that is very good. But for the demand side, we have to put money into the hands of people. So in other countries, anybody who's laid off is paid 80% of the pay by the government. What about all the migrant labor? The Jandan accounts can be refilled at 5,000 rupees a month for 2-3 months. How do you open small tea shops, hairdressers, laundries, or dhobis? the carpenters, plumbers. So unless we put money into the hands of the consumer with GST reduction, maybe a tax giveaway for some time, we have to positively put this $100 billion in the economy.
But Mr.
In
Venu
addition,
Srinivasan, the government will argue that revenue is already hard to come by, finances are stretched, and as a result, you can't compare what Germany, Japan or the United States have done with the ability of the Indian government to bail out industry in the same fashion. They're actually hoping that industrialists like you, can find your own ways of bouncing back rather than putting the entire onus on the government, sir.
well, America, if you look at the fiscal deficit, is larger than India. Their debt to GDP ratios are much higher than India. We have more space than we think we have. And on top of that, we need to spend on infrastructure. This is the best time to take Swachh Bharat and put in 50 cities 100% wastewater recycling, which will also help the country, which will save our groundwater, provide drinking water, irrigation, whatever we need, and also solid waste, which is polluting the ground. Take the solid waste, reclaim it, recycle it. I think there are huge opportunities which for the future we can invest in. So the combination of the two is the only way, otherwise there will be no demand. And if there's no fiscal incentive, I expect the demand to come back only in 6 quarters.
You're
Which is
expecting that it will
21
take 6 quarters for demand to start coming back to normal.
Yes.
Chandrajit Banerjee, we've spoken about different
And I have
sectors.
one more comment I want to make. If you don't do a fiscal expansion, I expect to see a 1 to 2% contraction in the GDP.
So you're saying rather than the 1 to 2% expansion that the IMF spoke about, you're actually expecting the GDP to contract. Chandrajit Banerjee, we've spoken about different sectors. I want to zoom out for a moment and look at India Inc. in totality. What is it that in the immediate aftermath of the lockdown 2.0, starting the 3rd of May, you think industry requires so that the economy can start getting ventilated?
So, having taken leadership, global leadership in terms of being able to handle COVID pretty well, and I think India stands very tall in terms of the way it has been able to handle so far. We really need to focus now on livelihood side, very, very important. And post the 3rd of May, one would need to see a strong focus towards more economic activities being facilitated, and we need to see the exit from the lockdown to be a little bit more aggressive across. More definition, more facilitation, definition in terms of what would be a red zone like, what it would mean, how we can allow more transportation taking place. You see, you cannot open up if your supply chain is just 95% fine. You can open up if your supply chain is 100% fine. So all of this, be it manufacturing and be and beyond, we need to see a much more aggressive opening up.
One of the challenges though, CB, has been that even in the non-hotspot areas where manufacturing has now been allowed post the 20th of April, there hardly has been any kickstart of industrial activity. That's because industrialists at this moment seem to be fearing that even if they produce, if everybody else is locked down, nobody's traveling, nobody's consuming, there is no demand. So therefore, what's the point of creating stock when you don't even know how it will ultimately get used? So what is it that you believe? Fixing supply chains is one part of the problem. What is it that you believe needs to be done to ensure that industries actually start manufacturing once again and employees get back to work?
So very important, of course, the supply chain. And number two, you need to open up stores. You need to see more and more so that there could be an outlet. So there's no point if the dealers don't open up, and you cannot just stockpile by manufacturing. So you need to see dealers opening up. So you need to see that chain also opening up so that there is demand. So aggressively, we also need to see before I come to the package, there is one more point that I would like to see in is the way we are really interpreting our MHA guidelines, the MHA clarifications that come out every day. Great clarification. In fact, today I just saw this paper which gives the MHA clarification this evening, just a couple of hours, which came out to say that they will let transportation go through the trucks, free movement of trucks, something that we have been demanding for such a long time. It's a fantastic thing to happen. So we need that. We need that interpretation. We don't want a sort of a extortion raj to come back at the district level to say that you cannot open up your shop. Prove to me that you are an electrician for you to go out. Show me your ITI certificate. All of that can't happen. You need to be more facilitating. And for all of this to happen, most importantly, along with the opening up, as you go up from the 3rd of May, we need to see the package coming in. The strong fiscal package that Mr. Venu Srinivasan spoke about, but we need to see the package very well dovetailed with those for the workers, for the self-employed operators. Is going to be very important to give that for poor package along with the MSME package plus the industry, the stress sectors package. This is a very aggressive. India has the space today. India needs to do that. We need to. This is the right time really to look hard on the FRPM and move out and to see and as Mr. Srinivasan mentioned, the debt to GDP ratio. India stands such a the entire world, if you really look at, is looking up to India to give that space. And there is so much of potential, not just us opening up. There are companies waiting to come into India. There are other companies wanting to relocate. So our strategies would need to be very, very aggressively working towards this.
Okay. So we'll build on some of the points that you've made. One of the things you said is that stores need to open, and the one man who knows how stores run, especially in malls, is Arjun Sharma, chairperson of the Select Group. Now, you run the Select City Mall amongst various other such real estate projects. I want to understand from you, Mr. Sharma, because the fear is that as you come into a closed, air-conditioned space, that is the most fertile ground for COVID-19 to spread. The other problem is that at this time there's uncertainty about job prospects, salaries are being cut, there's most certainly no appraisal increment happening, and therefore discretionary spending would be held back. How do you hope to get stores back, to get footfalls there, and yet at the same time ensure that malls don't become a channel for the spread of COVID?
Well, Rahul, our view, and that is the view of the Shopping Center Association of India, we're about 650 plus members, that shopping centers probably represent the best way to manage social distancing, ensuring that everybody who enters and exits is wearing masks, make sure that we have the carrying capacity, not just of the shopping center by floor, but also of each of the stores. Now, that is something that you cannot do in open spaces or in open markets. So really, if at all, any retail has to open, organized retail is just the most fertile place to open. Now, your question on air conditioning, actually, this is a bit of a misnomer. If you basically treat your air well and you have proper filtration systems and HEPA filtration systems, which most shopping centers have today, then absolutely the inflow of viruses can be blocked to a great extent. And we also know the fact that even when they come into the center, we will not allow people to walk around as any responsible business without masks. So if you sanitize the place well, if you keep the place clean well, and we are working with the retailers on the bounce back. People like Colleen's brands are already in touch with shopping centers. They are figuring out that maybe we're not going to open with 100%, as and when the government allows, and we hope that they allow it fast. That we will probably open, say, with a 30% and step it up gradually.
So explain to our viewers who are watching you, what would the new mall look like in the post-lockdown scenario vis-a-vis a regular mall experience before coronavirus hit us?
Well, Rahul, for sure, you will not see the same crowds. You will not see too many programs of culture and get-togethers that we do often. Like, we celebrate every festival, for example, with great aplomb. We will not be doing that. We will be probably rejigging a bit of the mall portfolio to include more essential items. A lot of empty spaces in the mall atriums could be used, for example, to add more essential items. And we are seeing, for example, when we've been doing customer surveys, that people actually are quite bottled up sitting at home in this lockdown, and there is a degree of frustration. Yes, people have lost jobs. There have been salary cuts across middle India, upper India, but people still, Indians intrinsically are savers. So, for example, we're seeing that women are asking us, can we come back for makeup? People are asking, is the toaster, can we buy a toaster? I need a new Apple phone, or I need a new charger. So there is a different kind of customer. Yes, there will be some like F&B, I think certainly will get affected in the long run. So you'll probably see, restaurants with maybe 30% capacity, 40% capacity. But by far and large, we are quite conscious that in the first maybe, I would say close to 2 to 3 weeks, we will probably open with only 25% of our carrying capacity in each of these shopping centers. And that will be a good way, because we also want to work with our retailers to get their cash flows going. And I think the retailers that have domestic manufacturing will probably be the ones that will be the fastest off the ground, because they're able to ramp up manufacturing, and people who are dependent on imports will struggle to kind of get their logistics into place.
Okay, Varun
So I think
Kaitan,
it's
I
going
want
to
to
be a
spend a
challenge.
moment talking about the startup ecosystem. So, one at eConclave, which you now call the Urban Company, and secondly, across startups, there's been a huge concern that cash flows are down. In any case, the financial situation with startups at any time hugely precarious. More rounds of funding could be hard to come by. How are you hoping to tide over the coronavirus crisis?
Thank you, Rahul. I would say, first of all, overall, at a country level, I'm very proud to see the actions of the government. The lockdown has been successful in controlling the situation in the country. And since April 20th, the government has slowly allowed the number of essential services in the country to open up, starting with the most important low-risk ones. The strategy of the government to actually open up the economy in phases, in zones, and by industry seems to be the right one. As a young company, of course, such a situation is unprecedented and leads to a fair amount of financial stress. But we have taken a set of measures internally. Thankfully, we had a strong balance sheet to start with, but we have made sure that one, we reduce our costs for the time being, although we haven't taken any strict action against employees, no salary cuts, no layoffs. We've been able to reduce all other costs so that we are able to survive longer as a lean company, and we are looking forward to the future. So according to the MHA guidelines, some of our businesses like home repair services have been allowed, and then states have followed suit. So some part of our business has opened up, and we are looking forward for the government to allow more and more lines of business to start opening up. I think.
Do you have a
as
sense
the
of
economy
the
opens up,
entire startup ecosystem? How many of the startups do you think will survive this crisis, and how many are you afraid may go under?
I think it's hard to put a number. I would say startups which are very early in their journey would probably face the heat because of the uncertain situation. But among the more mature ones, the companies that have followed prudent practices and run good businesses, I think a majority of them will be doing fine. In fact, as an industry, e-commerce is something I expect the government should fully support. As we come out of lockdown, I have really, two messages. One, that the government puts in place strict norms around safety and hygiene, so that as we gradually open up, we don't let the virus spread, and we don't put any risk of taking steps backwards if things go out of hand. So let's be very strict and careful as an industry and as government to responsibly open things up. And second, my point would be that the government should encourage e-commerce and home delivery of products as well as services.
Okay.
Because e-commerce overall reduces the number of contacts, enables distancing. One can ensure safety practices like masks, gloves, enforcement of containment zones. All of this is actually happening. And we can even ensure contactless services, contactless payments. So many advantages to e-commerce. I think e-commerce should be promoted, and even I would say the traditional industries should be encouraged to partner with e-commerce companies, even bringing the shops and stores to be doing home delivery, to be adopting technology as a means of creating a safe environment
Okay,
for
so
consumers
the
to
challenge,
consume
remember,
products and
is
services.
twofold. One is to save companies and ensure that they don't go under. The other is to save jobs and to save lives. So how do you balance these challenges, lives and livelihoods? Save lives, save livelihoods, both at the same time. We have a first-rate panel providing some very sharp insights based on their own individual experiences. So I want to now deal for a moment, Mr. Srinivasan, with lives versus livelihoods, let's deal with livelihoods. Because the International Labour Organization, the ILO, has projected that up to 50% of the world's jobs are in jeopardy. That's the ILO report that came out. How are you dealing with the issue of job losses? Have there been job losses at TBS, the sector? The government has said don't downsize at this moment. We know though that across several, especially smaller and medium companies, there have been a lot of job losses. How can we mitigate this and ensure that there is as less blood on the factory floor as is possible?
Well, OEMs like us and large groups will not lay off anybody or cut salaries of union staff. And it may also apply to next level large tier 1 suppliers like TVS or Bosch or Bharat Forge. But once you go to tier 2, they are already under strain and close to bankruptcy. They will take whatever decision they have to take. And there are thousands and thousands of job losses, as you can see from the migrants who are moving from Bombay, Delhi, and spreading out across the country. The one concern that we have is we already really locked down and done something remarkable under our Prime Minister's leadership. We have really taken a tough call and bit the bullet. But now we have no choice, even at a risk of some continuing spread, to open up because livelihoods have to be saved. It is not about economy and the companies doing well. It is about 100 million people losing their jobs in the country would create a social situation that would be very difficult to manage. And therefore, we must look at livelihoods, particularly what Chandrajit Banerjee said about migrant labor, small shops, small businesses.
No, let's deal for a moment with the automobile sector, Mr. Srinivasan, because one of the meta trends globally in manufacturing has been towards automation and robotics. Now there is the added concern about hygiene and infection. Do you think that it is only inevitable that COVID-19 will accelerate the speed of the adoption of automation, robotics inside automobile manufacturing, and that could impact job creation and job serviceability in the medium term?
Hello?
Do you hear me, sir?
Hello? Sorry. No, but I would like to say that, that adoption will go on. There may be a short-term impetus, but within the next 6 months or a year, after the first wave, the second wave, the COVID will go away like other things. We'll develop antibodies, we'll develop drugs, we'll develop vaccines. So I don't see that a long-term trend is automation, but a long-term trend would be work from home, travel much less, and therefore it will affect reality, it will affect hotels, it will affect airlines, and you're seeing decimation of airlines. So it will have other long-term impact. But I think COVID itself driving huge automation, because all this is for, in my opinion, maybe a year away before we get a treatment, at least definitely a drug, and maybe 15 months before we get a vaccine. So I don't, the cholera came, the plague came, the Spanish flu came, now the COVID. I think this too will pass.
Mr. Chatwal, the hospitality sector has never dealt with a situation like this. Whether it was SARS, Gulf War, 9/11, there have been crises in the hospitality sector, but never anything of this magnitude. Now, the hospitality sector is also one of India's biggest employers, with about 43 million people employed. It's 9.2% of India's GDP. How are you looking at the issue of job losses, especially outside the big chains, in the smaller hotels, smaller restaurants? How concerned are you? What can we do to try and minimize job losses?
I think I first want to take a step back to the previous questions and want to build on what Mr. Srinivasan had said. We are in this crisis, which is also a very big opportunity. Every crisis also creates opportunities, and it is not just the pitfalls that come with it. So firstly, I think we have demonstrated a huge amount of solidarity in the last 5 weeks. And everyone in this has been together. It was not government versus businesses, businesses versus employers, employers versus employees, employees versus migrant. I think we can all say that everybody showed a lot of discipline, and we did quite well and should keep doing what we have done. And I think going forward, it is very important that it is again not that one institution that can bring us out of this crisis and help us reduce the job losses. If we work collectively in creating a right framework, then I am quite sure and I remain very confident that the job losses will be minimal, or on the contrary, all the industries will thrive going forward. And
When
all
you
the
say right
industries
framework,
will,
Mr. Chatwal, what's the kind of framework
well,
that you would
let's
like
say
to see
we have,
implemented to minimize job losses?
for sure, like we got a 3-month moratorium on principals, interest, on all other obligations. Maybe a 12-month moratorium is needed. Maybe, licenses get extended automatic because businesses cannot do anything if they are shut down, and you have to still pay the excise fees, you still have to pay property taxes, you still have to pay all other duties and obligations without having any revenue or use of the space. I think state governments can help in terms of giving electricity or other utilities at a marginalized cost or certain reductions. So why is that important? It's very important in certain industries. Let's say, for example, you said 9.2% of the jobs, or so 9.2% is the contribution to GDP from hotel and tourism business, creating almost 8% jobs directly, and indirectly more than 12.5% of the population employed is directly or indirectly related to this sector. So I think uh, in order to make sure that everybody gets enough cash flows, including the tax cash flow coming in, it's very important to create a framework that induces travel, that induces domestic demand, that induces job creation, and not only creation, it induces job protection. As Mr. Srinivasan said, and there are countries where 80% of the labor cost has been subsidized by the government. Maybe 80 is the wrong percentage for us and is not relevant, but maybe it's 20, maybe it's 30. We requested as Hotel Association for 50 for a few months, and that would help create less volatility, create working capital, and help secure not only what we have, but to build a very strong future.
Kulin Lalbhai, in the retail sector, in the manufacturing sector, in the textile sector, what do you think needs to be done to try and ensure that as many jobs as is possible and as many companies as is possible can be protected?
The core challenge in this whole value chain of apparel retail is that the number of people involved is very large. So for example, in garmenting and retail, your blue collar workers could be as high as 55% of your costs. So it's very people intensive. And to make things more challenging, it is also working capital intensive. So most retailers would be sitting on 3 to 6 months of working capital. So I think the short-term focus has to be on survival and then on recovery. And I think on survival, the most important thing that is required is liquidity. I think companies will need the most help upfront when their revenues are 10, 20%. So if they have access to liquidity and longer moratoriums, then that itself will play a very large role in allowing more companies to survive and thereby the job losses being less. And the second thing, I think, for very job intensive sectors, between apparel, between manufacturing and retail in our segments, almost, we are talking about 70 million, people involved. So, it's very critical that, the support is given up front, and maybe for the blue collared workers, there could be some direct support on salary, some partial support on salary given by the government, especially for the stress sectors. After we are through the survival phase, I think in the recovery phase, I would add to what Venuji said, some sort of demand stimulus would definitely help. But I think in the next 3 to 4 months, in the survival phase, liquidity and some sort of employment support would go a very long way.
Let me put that question then to Chandrajit Banerjee, because you spend virtually your entire day liaising with government, talking to various policy makers, ministers, bureaucrats, and when you tell them that virtually every sector is seeking some kind of employment support, from what I know, what they tell me, they say that's impossible, you have to be realistic. if we have to protect people, we'll protect farmers, migrant workers, we're still trying to work out some kind of a package, maybe even MSMEs. But if the bigger groups also start seeking employment support, they say that is impossible. How do you reconcile these two challenges, the real problems that these industrialists face with the constraints of the revenue available with the government to spend?
No, I think we'll have to have a very practical support to outlook to it. As if you will see, what really required is you have had monetary interventions, RBI coming in very strongly over the last a couple of times. Now, what's required, and this is the right time to do it. And if you see the type of economic suffering that the main thing that really comes out is jobs at this point in time, a huge issue on jobs. And if you really expect the industry to keep employment intact, there is got to be governments worldwide has actually supported. It is just not, say, for instance, we talked about the MSME sector, the recommendation of an additional loan limit of, say, 3 months of the wage bill, which will enable them to pay the workers' wages. But there is also, if one really looks at going across, because it's not just the small and the medium sector, but it has to go up the chain. It has to be for the larger companies, because the larger companies itself would be able to see to it that they are able to, say, for instance, make a payment to the small scale industry. It's the mid-sized companies, the larger companies. So there is a lot more support which is required from the government, even for the stressed sector. Which could be large, additional working capital limits, say, for instance, which should be provided for all enterprises. It should be across the board, and this should also be equivalent to 3 months wage bill and government's guarantee and the RBI backstop facility, which is going to be extremely important. So there is a lot that really required to be done from the government support. And today, I would imagine that India has that space. India has that economic space even today. To really support that, and it in turn say sort of will be able to today. So when you need to kickstart the demand, so to say. So we need some extraordinary measures to tackle these extraordinary times. Say, for instance, GST. We have to have some way of doing away with it. There is no production anyway at this point in time. So there is the income from GST could be really looked at from the point of view by the government of saying that let us forego with it for some time and see to it that itself helps in picking up of the demand, and wherein we can get production coming in, we can see more demand coming in, and therefore lesser job losses. So it's extremely important, and I would imagine that the government's role in this would be as important as industry. Industry will have to do its bit. Industry is going to do it. It's coming out going to be much more efficient. It is going to be having its control on costs. It's going to be seeing to it that, and it would need labor. Today, one of the biggest issues that we are seeing also, Rahul, is in this COVID scenario, that there is a strong lack of even available workers for a restart, because people have gone back home.
No, but Venu Srinivasan, since I speak to so many people in government, can I throw their contention at you that they would rather that you find ways of optimizing efficiency levels, that you find ways of cutting operational costs, that you find ways of creating extra efficiencies, as opposed to starting to retrench? What is it that's being done at TVS and in the automobile sector, in your sense of what's happening across India, to try and reduce costs and make business more optimal?
Well, we have protected all our workers as of now, and we'll continue to do it as much as possible. And if somebody leaves, it will be by a voluntary retirement package, which they accept, and which is a substantial outgo for the company, and not by retrenchment. But I think the biggest problem is what Chandrajit Banerjee just said. If you don't have sales, you don't have GST. So if you don't put money in the hands of consumers and also support the larger companies, as Mr. Chatwal said, give a 12-month, 6-month moratorium maybe, and larger companies also to survive. Otherwise, if you have massive bankruptcies and job losses, how are we going to manage? So it's all right to say companies they should manage, but they'll go to IBC. Then what will you do?
Okay. Arjun Sharma, while it's been said to all malls that don't retrench, what we know has happened anecdotally is that a lot of employees have been told not to come, they're not being paid, whether they still have a job or not is uncertain, but they definitely aren't being paid salaries. A lot of them are in the semi-organized kind of sector. What do you think can and should be done to minimize job losses?
Well, Rahul, I would agree with all the speakers before. I think the government has to act. And I think the Prime Minister's office, the Finance Minister, the Reserve Bank of India are all completely seized of our problems as an industry as a whole. It's not just about any particular sector. And I'm sure they will come out with packages. And I think, for example, we saw the LTRO window of 50,000 crores. I think we need something like 10 lakh crores. Now, you give an example that, look, we don't have the funds and maybe the Western world can do it. But do you know that in a country like Bangladesh, which is heavily textile oriented, export oriented, the government has given already a bailout package and low interest loans of 2% to all the exporters. So if small countries like that can do it, why is it that we would shirk away? And I'm very confident that, with people like CB of CII on the job, they have represented very hard and they have represented in a very compelling manner to the government that this is now about survival. When it comes to jobs, I think the industry, the state governments and the center has to work together. Now, there are funds with the ESI, there are funds with PF, there are funds that we have. Now, if we have to, as a private sector, bear the entire cost, that is very unfair. But we all have to work together. Now, the problem is not really so much with the large companies. The large companies are all being very responsible, as Mr. Srinivasan said. Our problem is the unorganized sector, the smaller, the MSMEs, which comprise the majority of India. So whether it's travel, tourism, hospitality, retail, the Kinara shop, everybody is affected. So I think if we don't find a solution to this problem in the next 30 days, there is going to be a social unrest in this society and the economy, which is far worse than COVID-19. So I think the government is in a precarious position. They have to make those choices. And I think the mandarins who are sitting in the Reserve Bank of India, Finance Ministry, the Prime Minister, they're all aware of this. And I'm very confident they'll come out with something. I'm completely confident we'll have a package for sure.
Kulin Albai, on the issue of trying to cut costs, operational costs, so that it doesn't lead to retrenchment and job losses, can you explain what you're doing and what you see the sector do to try and make businesses more efficient in the way that they operate?
Yes, I think, everyone will try and find some way to go through this phase. For example, the garment sector is incredibly high on its fixed costs on people. So one reinvention the garment sector has done in India, and this has been amazing to be a part of, is that everyone is pivoting to creating PPEs and bodysuits. And a lot of responsible manufacturers were able to work together with the government. And in a period of 30 days, we could create an entire supply chain. And today, we will reach an area where India will be possibly self-sufficient by mid-May. And it could become an industry which could export to the world thereafter. So I think whilst there will definitely be a need to become very efficient on costs, and that will mean removing all inefficiencies from the system, that in itself may not suffice. Each business model will have to innovate so that even through the worst period of the crisis, there could be some revenue coming in. For example, in retail, stores will need to augment in-store revenue with omni-channel revenue. In Europe today, when stores are reopening, almost half of their revenue is coming from servicing online orders. And I see this as the future in India for the next 4 months. So I don't think for certain sectors, it will be possible to just survive through the cost side of the equation. You will have to pivot the business model and innovate to survive.
No, but one of the things that Varun Khaitan said, that you have to encourage e-commerce. Now, we saw when the government came out with a new norm that e-commerce could be started in a limited fashion, there was a big backlash from the retail sector saying that this will finish off our businesses, these are all the Amazons and the Flipkarts of the world, this is be Swadeshi or a Swadeshi government, and the government came under so much pressure that they had to go back. So how do you look at this whole business and the whole idea of encouraging e-commerce, which can be a safe way of delivering products to people's home, but of course then the retail sector, the physical retail sector will take a hit?
The future of the world is omni-channel. I think anyone staying with the older model of saying there's physical retail and e-commerce and they will clash, I think that model is outdated. I think inventory has to be seamless between both channels, and so do customers. So as the industry evolves and becomes more sophisticated, I am a big believer that everyone will embrace omni-channel commerce, and that's the way to survive in the post-COVID world. So yes, there are various interests in India. There are various stakeholders involved. But I think I'm very convinced that safe shopping will have to be an omni-channel world where offline inventory also becomes online, so that stakeholders on both sides of the equation can continue to scale up their businesses in a safe way.
Okay, Varun Khaitan, in the startup sector, where in any case funding is precarious at the best of times, how are you grappling with the issue of job losses and preventing them?
Yeah. Rahul, I would look at it in two ways. One is, like you said, making the business more efficient and lean and looking at costs which are unnecessary. That helps you to some extent extend runways. I think the larger respite can only come when revenues start coming. So one aspect is businesses reopening. Startups here, have the edge of doing innovative things to make their core business seem more safer to the customers. For instance, we are doing a lot of things with technology as well as protective equipment to show to customers that we are following strict safety protocols and they can book home services without worrying about health and COVID concerns. I think that's one area where businesses can innovate and startups are innovating.
No, but there's a problem
Second,
there, right? Let's assume I want to call
opportunities.
somebody from eConclave for any particular servicing. I don't know who this person is, I don't know what kind of sanitation and hygiene he's maintained, I don't know whether he has COVID or not, and I'd be very concerned even if that idea crossed my head. Let's assume summer's here and you want to get your air conditioners serviced and operational, and you thought, okay, let's order in from eConclave, but you'd be very worried about doing that. That's a reality.
That's a very fair question, Rahul. That is why we have taken a whole set of very strict safety measures which we show on our mobile app. And in fact, in cities where our home services have been allowed, demand has very successfully bounced back. So some of the things we are doing is we are doing everyday temperature checks of our service professionals, which we show to the customers. We are religiously enforcing the government Arogya Setu app so that professionals only coming from safe areas are coming to provide services. And there is mandatory use of protective equipment, which we audit through selfies and cameras. We are doing contactless services and contactless payments. And all of this is giving the users confidence that they can avail home repair services without worrying about the risk of corona.
Okay, so we've had an important conversation. I'm not certain that we had all the answers, but we've touched upon the concerns of a cross-section of Indian industry. Lots of expectations from the government in terms of what industry hopes the government can do. The government constantly explaining its own limitations. It will be interesting to see what Stimulus 2.0 looks like. Remember, this is just the first part of our Jumpstart series. We believe this is one of the most important questions of our times. Now that we've been locked in for more than a month, how do you start ventilating the economy and bouncing back from corona coma? So over the next several days, we'll keep inviting top voices from across the sectors of Indian industry and also from government and globally, experts who will help us wrap our heads around this key challenge of bouncing back after COVID-19. Venu Srinivasan, Chandrajit Banerjee, Kulin Lalbai, Arjun Sharma, Puneet Chatwal, Varun Khaitan for taking out time and for sharing your insights on what you believe is being done and needs to be done to take this economic virus down. I want to thank you.